All right, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those of you in the East Coast, and Jiffin, good evening. Um, okay, so exciting day today. Last night, after quite a bit of uh, pinging Tim, he reviewed the KEP again, and let's go over it together. Um, so, so the good news is he said that uh, it is okay to move forward with what we have today. Um, but I mostly think it's okay to proceed. That's what he said. So he still has a bunch of concerns. Some are big, access control, cardinality, and etc. But mostly, I think it's okay to proceed. I think there's a ton of work to be done between alpha and beta, which we expected, especially reference policy, access control, workload identity-based access control. That is, um, and so he says the one thing that is blocking this is this um, some of the open comments that he has. Um, so we addressed the open comments that he had last time, and he kind of divided them into 6 broad topics. Some of them overlapping, so I'll just go over the ones that are. I'll just tell you the non-overlapping ones. So this is the 3 of them. So one was flattening the BAR and BA. One was sharing buckets between different namespaces, and one is what should be in the protocol, what should be in the bucket class versus the bucket request. Um, so overall, it was like about naming and what goes where in the API, and also flattening. I didn't mention I didn't mention the access control around who gets to use what bucket. Um, so there's 2 layers to access control. Let me put it that way. One is who gets to use what bucket, which we solved with reference policy. One more is how do we know, or how do they get the access? Like, do we do access key, secret key, or do we do workload identity? So this was 25 days ago, where we had left off. We said um, back then we were saying that we will allow bucket sharing to be free for all, and reference policy would be something for the future, that is beta. And that's where I've left the cap where we last spoke. But I think some of the questions he's brought up here are really asking us to flush out reference policy stuff. Okay, so let's go over the comments he had. Um, so one of them is I'm reading it for the first time along with you. So I'll probably comment more as I get here. First of all, can you see my screen? Can you read what's on my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, zoom in a little bit. Okay, I'll probably comment more as I get there and acknowledge my bias on this, but given how much effort has been missed in secret-less authentication, not having something in place for it feels like a grave omission. I'm not saying Cozy needs to make it work on platforms that don't support it. I'm saying that those platforms which do support it should not be dumbed down. Fair. We said we'll get to it.
So just to understand clearly, he means something other than access key, secret key.
Yeah, dumbed down is this access key and secret key method, he's saying. What he's asking for is workload identity-based authentication.
Okay, so making that a first class citizen alongside access key, secret key.
Yeah. That's why he says there's a lot to do for B. Yeah.
Well, and where do we stand on that? Because
we're going to do it after beta, or between alpha and beta.
After alpha, okay.
Right?
It was the impression I get here is that he's not okay with that.
No, it's not that he's not okay with that. He just forgot what we talked about, because last time I said this, he was fine with it. It's been 25 days since his last review.
Does he want you to do things in phases? Like maybe phase 1, you have a
Yeah.
smaller scope, and then but you also kind of describe what you want to do in phase two.
Yeah, I think that's what we should do. That's the one change I'll make.
I mean, doing a phased delivery makes sense, but I think it needs to be negotiated. Like I read this comment as saying that he doesn't want us to put off the secretless authentication for
But
buckets. Like
here
he
it says
thinks,
non goals. I think he wanted to be in gold at least, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if he says that you have to. I think he says you have to have a plan. I don't know if he wants
yeah.
implement
Whether
it.
we implement it or not, I think he wants it to be explicit that like we are doing this and we have a clue how we're doing it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We're just saying we'll figure it out after alpha, and we know it's possible.
Well, I mean, if I was Tim, I would be nervous about that statement.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We haven't flushed it out, Ben. So we'll have to sit and do that if you're going to add stuff here. But technically, I don't see a reason why we can't have cozy tie the pod's identity or pods from a certain namespace identity to
Yeah,
to
but my recollection is that the fundamental challenge was when we got down into the details of the downward facing API, it quickly gets challenging to sort of have a negotiation between the pod and the CO, right? Because if the pod, like two things have to support the secretless authentication, right? The underlying object storage system needs to, and the pod's object bucket client needs to support it.
Mhm.
And if either of those doesn't support it, you need a way to fall back. And so you have basically have a three-way negotiation. And we talked about what that might look like, and we said that's really hard. Let's not worry about that. But I think you can't just punt on it and say, well, we'll do it later, because like later we still need to do the three-way negotiation or make it mandatory or do something.
So when you say this hard, let's go into why we say it's hard. To do the negotiation between the pod and the object storage system.
Right. So the fundamental issue is that like if I'm writing the workload that's going to consume the bucket, I know what bits I'm putting into my image and what, which SDK I'm using and what it can support. And so like if it has native support for the secretless authentication, like that's a fact that I know, but Kubernetes doesn't. Similarly, the cozy driver also knows whether it can do secretless authentication down underneath. And it can tell Kubernetes, because Kubernetes can just ask it through the cozy RPCs, what styles of authentication can you support? But the thing that's missing is the user doesn't get a chance to tell Kubernetes what authentication style his workload supports until it's too late, right? Because at the point that you create the pod and you have the bucket access and in pop the injected credential files, like if it's not what you support in your workload, you're just not going to work. So like if we want to make them optional and not mandatory, like we could take the stance that says, look, everyone has to support access key secret key and everyone has to support native access, and if you don't, you're just not cozy compliant and that's your problem. Like we could take that stance. But if we wanted to allow workloads to fall back to access key secret key, if they can't support the secretless authentication, then like there has to be a way to tell Kubernetes that's what you want before you create your bucket access, right? Because the bucket access is the thing that would mint a credential if you need one, or do something else if you don't need one. And so that there needs to be a point in the workflow where the user says, hey, I need a bucket access and it has to be secret key because my workload doesn't support secretless authentication, or I need access and my workload does support secretless authentication and I prefer it, so give me that, something along those lines. We just, in order for Kubernetes to arrange for the right thing to happen, it needs input from the user at that earlier stage.
I mean that I don't know if I see a big problem there, because you have the concept of a bucket access class, and the idea is if the user is requesting something from a particular bucket access class, and that
Well, right, but if we decide that the bucket access class is the right way to do this, then we need a first class field in the bucket access class that is understood to mean that to have a specific impact on the downward API. So, if this field is true in the bucket access class, then the thing that injects your credentials will definitely behave this way. And if it's false, it will definitely behave that way, right? You got to document it, and it can't be opaque or anything. It has to be first class if it affects the functioning of cozy and what you're going to see on the downward API. It's like we would have to go through the exercise of specifying what that field is and writing down what the behavior is.
Yeah. So Ben, I think in the goals, what Tim is saying here is we should say that we will support workload identity based authentication. I think that's what we need to say. He's again talking about the goals here, and he wants to know that that's something along the way. Because with everything that we just talked about, I don't see what's hard. I don't know what is really there to flesh out.
It's just being sharp about the downward API and not leaving it mushy, right? To be like this is exactly what you're going to get, and you can predict it with certainty.
But I think when we start working on it, we might see more issues. But yeah, we could add a section about how we can enable that. Sure.
When we were talking about the downward API, this was the concern, was just that there's two different ways to do it, and we didn't want to put pods in a position of having to support both, but we didn't have an idea about how you could express your preference, and so it's just an exercise we need to go through to write down a way to do it. Like I agree that there's probably a way to do it. I just feel very uncomfortable saying, yeah, we'll figure it out later, because as with so many other things, once we get into the details, you're like, oh wait, this has knock-on effects over here, here, and here, and it could change the rest of the design.
Yeah,
that's my worry.
Okay, fair enough. So, okay, let's flush that out. Okay, so we'll actually follow like a depth-first approach, if that's okay with everyone. Let's get into how the workload identity-based authentication looks like. Actually, let's go over the comments. There's like only a few comments. Let's just go over the comments quickly, and then we'll choose the highest priority and do that. Okay, so the other one is I encourage you to talk to gateway folks. They're trailblazing API versioning and evolution here, and I'm just not really they're figuring out. We're already talking to them. How do I let them know that? We're already talking to them. We're already basing our API based off of gateway API. We should probably mention that. I should probably mention how we're coming up with the reference policy. And we're also in touch with SIG Auth, who knows that we're working on this. Yeah.
So you can just respond in the PR as a comment, right?
Yeah. What purpose does protocol support in the class now? Is it just informational? No. So it's just omission. This is just like, mistakes. What about providers that support more than one protocol? Multiple bucket classes. Remind me why params is a map rather than a reference to a typed object. Okay, so this is in bucket bucket object, the bucket itself. So his question is, why is parameters a map rather than a typed object? This is because we can't anticipate parameters that are vendor specific, right?
On the bucket class?
No, bucket object, the bucket.
Oh, this is because we want to copy the opaque params from the bucket class to the object for future reference, right?
Mm.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we just need to write that down, I guess, and say this is just a copy of what was in the bucket class, because we want to remember what the values were, even if the bucket class is modified or deleted.
Right. That's my understanding also, Ben.
Sorry, repeat that. You're saying these parameters exist So
The parameters are copied from the bucket class at creation time.
question is, why is there a map rather than a typed object?
Right, because there's a map in the bucket class.
Right, but he's not asking just in case of bucket. I would say the question also extends to bucket class.
Oh, well, I mean, in the bucket class, the reason it's opaque is because these are intended for vendor specific options that are opaque to Kubernetes. And we can point to storage class and snapshot class as
Exactly.
examples.
Exactly. I was just going to say that.
Okay, that's good. So storage class and snapshot classes, very good to know. That'll be a strong argument. Okay. Okay, this is just artifact of editing. Since we don't have a compiler that tells me I've got the wrong reference here. Yeah. So quick update. We went over this once before, but I'm just going to say it again. So one of the things that Tim wanted to do was start calling it bucket claim instead of bucket access request. So that it's more congruent with persistent volume claim. So
But wouldn't the BR be the thing that gets renamed to bucket claim, not the BAR?
how is that?
I don't know. Like the PVC is the thing that causes the PV to get provisioned. The BR is the thing that causes the B to get provisioned. BAR is just around access. It doesn't provision anything other than the credential.
So but okay, so what about the fact that PVC is the claim that the pod has to get access to the PV or to get the PV?
But because with volumes, it's a one-to-one thing. Only one user can have a volume. They're not shared. With buckets, they are shared, and the idea is you have multiple credentials through the bucket accesses. So there's like a level of indirection. There's still just one bucket, just like there's just one volume. It's just we're being explicit about the fact it's being shared.
I don't know if that's the reason, because we do have one-to-many in volumes, and where I'm coming from is, isn't it more so bucket request is more like a request to create a bucket. A bucket claim is a claim to use it. Bucket access claim, would that be more cleaner here?
I mean, I agree. If we rename one, we should consider renaming both. But the raw bucket claim seems to be the thing. If you're going for symmetry with PVCs, then it's the BR that should become a claim, because there is no analog of the BAR in volumes, because you don't mint credentials for access to them. You just tell kubelet to mount it.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Can you remind me who he's like explicit by writing here, who decides whether to allow random claim to access a given bucket? Reference policy. Yeah, we can, right now it's free for all in this current cap, but eventually reference policy. So yeah, let's go through the rest of the comments, and then we'll get back to the ones that we still need to talk about. One of them is this: do we want another claim object, or can we just make do with request objects? Okay, it's not clear to me how reference policy applies. That is about namespace and namespace access, or is the thinking that I have a claim in my namespace that references a BR and other namespace or something else? I'm trying to get the cardinality straight. Yes, he actually, he figured out. So I think he's looking at reference policy as like a cluster scoped object that says these are the references you're allowed to make. But the way we are looking at reference policy is the creator of the bucket in the namespace where the bucket is owned gets to set the reference policy for that bucket. and the way it's set is it points to another BR in a different namespace. Or it says anyone from a different namespace can BR in this name. Right? That's how we've discussed it so far. Can someone confirm that?
That sounds accurate to me.
Okay, we can. I can. You know, again, this was written before we discussed all that, so I have to rewrite this. Can bucket ready ever flick back? Oh yeah. What happens then? Yeah, we talked about this. Someone else can take ownership. There is a race condition, but it's not very different from PVCs and PV. Where if a PV is unbound, some other PVC can go and bind to it, but there's a race condition. You don't know which one's going to bind, but it's a risk we have chosen to take. Does anyone here from the PVC PV world know if that's a reasonable design choice to make? Where currently, if PVC and if there is a PV that is unbound, a PVC can bind to it, but there's no guarantee that will bind to it because some other PVC could also bind to it. So there's like the race condition. If we introduce a similar design with bucket requests and buckets, can is that okay? Like
Yeah, I think
think-
it should be. Oh, go ahead, Luis.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's from the point of view of the user, they're looking for, I'm talking about PVC issue. It's just a location of storage, and the user doesn't care as long as they get satisfied with the amount of storage that they're looking for. Wouldn't that be the same as a bucket? They would just get here's the bucket for you, and that will get satisfied. And I'm just saying if we're comparing them to, I'm not saying that we should go one way or the other.
Well, I think he's talking about gaining access to a pre-existing volume that somehow got it unbound.
Oh, it
Um,
doesn't.
So the situation with volumes is if the PV is totally unbound, yes, it's a first come first serve. Whoever knows the name of the PV can just bind to it, and the bind controller will honor that bind. But you can have a situation where you have a half bound PV where the PV points to a volume that or PVC that doesn't exist. In that case, only creation of that particular PVC would be allowed to bind. So we could have a similar situation where you have a half bound bucket that can only bind to a VC of a specific name in a specific namespace. And that would
Did
be
that ever happen? I don't
what?
remember. That situation happen? How can that situation happen? I guess that's what I'm asking.
With volumes.
Yeah.
If you change the retention policy on the PV to retain and you delete the PVC, the PV just remains in a half bound state after the PVC is gone.
It doesn't change to unbound.
Well,
Change to released. Will be released.
Yeah,
Relieved.
the controller under that situation may actually fully remove the claim, but you can go back in and half bind it yourself. You know, in the same way that you change the retention policy by just editing the PV object.
Isn't a PV immutable though? Once you can't. How I'm asking, it's like how can you get to that state? I just never heard that.
Parts
the
of
controller,
the
the controller changes. PV controller, the in-PV controller will change that actually.
Yeah.
You mean if you half bind it to something that doesn't exist, it'll just reverse that operation and go back to unbound?
Only the spec is immutable. The status can change, right? Like the
Yeah.
status.
No,
So-
the bind ref or the volume ref, whatever that field is in the spec that is the thing that is bound to is definitely mutable because that's how you rebind PVs, is by mutating it.
But the changing it from what's it called?
Released
yeah.
to half bound.
No, the model you like, the deletion model.
Oh,
That's
the retention policy is
Yeah.
mutable. Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Oh.
It's absolutely mutable.
It doesn't always be unbound. You can create dangling PVs. That's fair game in Kubernetes. I mean, that's how we did initially when we had to create volumes before 1.13 or very early on.
Yeah, 1.3. That was
Yeah,
a long
well,
time ago.
long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still remember doing it. Anyway, so that's possible. In that case too, if two different claims are trying to bind to it, you have this same issue. So the reason I asked the question of if that's okay is, what did people like? Did we face any issues that you know of from that kind of model? Is there any good reason that we should be aware of to avoid that you might know of?
I think it works more or less okay. I mean, I guess the risk is that it sort of grew organically instead of being designed to work the way it is. And so if you could go back to the drawing board and redesign it over, you might not do exactly what we do now. In fact, I know for certain that there are some behaviors of the PVC and PV that are only done the way they are for backwards compatibility. But I don't think the status quo with PVs and PVCs is broken or bad. It's just maybe a little suboptimal.
Okay, so then we can go back. We can answer with if a bucket becomes a dangling bucket, we can have someone own it again. Even though this question is specific to the bucket claim and access, it still makes sense. So this question is specifically if there is an bucket access or bucket claim that is pointing to a bucket, and the bucket's bucket ready status is false. What happens then? Then access is not granted. It's a simple. I think, or maybe he's asking if it was first ready and then afterwards it becomes not ready. Do we do something? We don't. We just let it be. So yeah, that's a good question. So if a bucket is alive or we created it, and then say someone goes and turns off the internet gateway on one of on the cloud they're on. So the pod, let's say, which is talking to a remote bucket over the internet, suddenly can't talk to it anymore. So the bucket ready gets set to false, and let's say in this bucket ready set to false, what do we do to the access that pods have?
I don't think you need to do anything
Yeah, just leave it.
because there's always going to be transient situations that can cause buckets to stop working and then start working again completely outside of Kubernetes, right? So an outage is an outage, and we don't need to change any objects in response to an outage. You just suffer the downtime, and when it comes back, it comes back.
Okay. You just let it be. Okay.
I mean, unless there's a way we can add value by doing something, but it doesn't seem like we're in a position to do anything. If something outside the cluster is broken, we just wait for it to not be broken.
Yeah, I think we want to expect that it'll always come back. Like you wouldn't want to mark it as orphaned or anything.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't add much value. Yeah, the application just keeps spinning. It keeps waiting for access to the bucket. That's all. Should we maybe set something in the? Yeah, we don't have to mark it as messed up. We don't have to. We could potentially mark the the claim object to say that access granted is. No, that's not true. Access.
As long as it being missing or broken wouldn't affect removing it, removing the request or anything, right? Anything associated with it. So if somebody dropped a bucket out from underneath us, make sure that we can still clean up afterwards. Like that would be the only consideration for wanting to mark it.
I'm not sure if we need to go that deep into this. This
Yeah.
happens on volumes completely. You get a volume ID that's referred to as a reference to some volume and some storage system. What happens if you just unplug the storage system and walk away with it? Right? I don't understand.
Fair enough.
You know, like I don't know if we should track that.
Oh,
Like-
fair enough. We don't have to go there.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next one. Could this be a list? So he's talking about providers that support multiple protocols like GCE that supports both Google Cloud Protocol for talking to buckets and S3. Our stance has always been create multiple bucket classes. We can stick with that. Should be a ref to provide a specific custom resource. Okay. So this is what he means. So should there be a pointer to provide a specific custom
Sid,
resource?
sorry, I was on mute.
Oh,
You know,
go ahead,
protocol
Jeff.
had been
We
a
came up
list
with this
of-
idea long back. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, remember we had a list of protocols.
Jeff,
and-
your voice is really quiet.
Hello?
Yeah, okay. I can.
We can barely hear you. You sound like you're down the hall.
Can you hear me now, Louis?
Yeah, perfect.
I'm just reminding the team that earlier on in the CAP protocol was a list. And we decided for vendors like Google that can support more than one, they would just create 2 bucket classes. We thought that was simpler. So are we reversing that
No,
line
but-
of reasoning?
No,
So
I
this-
think we keep with the bucket classes.
Whoever was speaking, please go ahead. Sorry, I spoke over you.
Well, I just said, I think we should keep with the bucket classes. I think that keeps it cleaner.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so too.
Does Google, for example, allow both S3 and Google Protocol access to the same bucket, essentially the same data?
It does, yes.
Because in that case, you may have 2 applications, one speaking S3, one speaking Google Protocol, that want access to a shared data set where they need 2 bucket, well, let me call it bars or bucket access claims, bucket claims, to get the corresponding authentication credentials,
Yeah.
but still reference one bucket, which
That's the multi-protocol bucket. And
Yeah.
we did discuss this and we intentionally said, we don't think that's important enough to bother with.
Oh,
so it's basically we rule out that use case, which is
Yes,
I'm not debating it, just
That,
making it
that
clear.
was the stance we took, and that's why we
Okay.
shrunk it to a singleton is to rule out that use case.
but it would still work. They would be they're separate classes, separate bucket access requests. It doesn't matter if they point to the same object on the back end from the front end, it's like 2 separate.
But we're talking about the bucket class. So the class that creates the bucket would have a specific protocol, and that's all you would get. And the bucket access classes couldn't override that.
Same thing. You have 2 buckets pointing to the same backend bucket with just different protocols.
Yes,
Well,
but-
yeah. If you hacked it so that you had 2 actual buckets that pointed to the same physical bucket, then you could recreate the multi-protocol use case. But Cozy wouldn't support that. It would be a hack.
But I mean, that's how it's designed, right? You would have separate bucket classes, separate bucket access requests. They would appear from Cozy as 2 separate independent buckets. They just happen to
Right.
have the same data.
But there was a time, right? But there was a time when we were considering directly supporting it with a single bucket and saying this bucket supports these 2 protocols, so you wouldn't need 2 buckets, and we ruled that out.
Yeah, I don't think there's any value in doing that. It just makes
Okay.
it ends up being more
so-
complicated.
So we say it's not a use case because the doing 2 buckets brings issues with deletion, for example. It's not necessarily a drop-in solution, even if it's a hack.
Right, but we don't think it's a common thing where people need
Fair,
2 different protocols to the same bucket.
fair, but maybe that should be documented. I mean, captured in the CAP as well.
Yeah, alternatives considered. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Thanks.
Okay, so the next one is, should this be a reference to a provided specific custom resource? It goes back to that parameters question. Why is there a map string? And why not provide a specific custom resource? So what, we just point to a UUID and type or something here? Does
Oh, a provider specific custom resource. That is something that we talked about at some point.
No, I think what we talked about was we went down that path of seeing if we can do S3 specific parameters, CCS specific parameters. But we need
No, this would be like I create a storage class for a NetApp volume provisioner, and instead of just putting all the NetApp specific parameters as string maps in the storage class, I would have a pointer to a NetApp storage class object that was typed, and then so we could go that way, like on the volume side, but we haven't done so. I think the proposal here is maybe that would be better.
Storage class, or like say NVMe storage class. Something.
I guess the challenge is at the end of the day, like the provisioner sidecar has to marshal that object across the gRPC socket and hand it to the actual driver. And a string map is really easy to marshal over the wire. A custom object is hard to marshal over the wire. So I don't know if that would be the main reason to not do it.
I agree with that observation, Ben. One interesting thing I just thought about was, if in support of Tim's idea, there is it could separate lines of concern, roles. It can separate the admin of a cluster role from a storage admin role. The storage admin manages this CR that has all the parameters for the type of object store, whereas the cluster admin just points to it when they create the bucket class. That's kind of interesting to me. Otherwise, I think parameters is just simpler. But that one idea is kind of interesting, the separation of concerns. If that makes sense to you guys.
It seems like a high-hanging fruit, not a low-hanging fruit.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so for the sake of Jeff, I think this. Okay, so for the sake of simplicity, we're saying we're going with parameter being a map string. Nothing provided for now. I mean, I don't think we can say we'll start with this and then we'll change later. I think we should take a strong stance. What do you think? So is it fair to say this is equivalent of what we have in storage class parameters? A storage class, that's a good escape hatch for driver specific parameters, right? Like CSI driver specific parameters.
Right. That's how we do it now.
Okay, so we're just going to go with map string because it's very similar to storage class, and I still don't know what's the easiest way to point to any CRD. I don't know if that adds much value either. Like,
I mean, we could have a field on the class called like parameters reference that could just be an object ref, and it could point to anything. And then, as far as Kubernetes was concerned, there'd still be no type checking. You could just point to anything. But then the question is, how do you marshal it over the wire to the client if it's anything other than a flat object with string values or string keys and string values? You have to do something complicated to get it over the gRPC socket. It is nicer from a just configuration management perspective to have typed objects that will reject typos and have error checking on them and stuff. But Kubernetes can't really help you.
Yeah, I can't see. Okay, so let's move forward. This doesn't add any value to have a provide a specific CR. That's what we're saying. Okay, so his other question was, this was moved to a class. Yes, protocol is going to be in a class. I have to update the cap. I have to do a clean job of it. That's what it is. Yeah, and we were kind of in a rush, and we kind of addressed the comments, but I guess not everywhere. There were some points that were missed. Okay, so let's get back to the two unanswered questions. One is workload identity-based authentication, and one more is VR and claim. Let's work on this claim thing first because it's simpler. We can probably decide during the course of this meeting. Maybe not, but maybe. Yeah, so before we start the discussion, hey, who from here is going to be at KubeCon next week?
I will be.
Oh, okay, great. So I'll also be there, Sheng.
Okay. Yeah, let's sync up.
So next week's meeting, I don't think we'll have next week's meeting.
It's canceled already. Sad already canceled it. So all 6 storage meetings are canceled next week.
Okay. All right. Okay. Will Sal also be there?
No, unfortunately, right now I only know you and me. There are a couple folks from data protection working group side. So I don't know anyone else. Luis, not going?
I will not be there.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, for some reason this time there won't be a lot of people. So Sid, I believe you'll be there for the Tuesday's event, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will be there. So we probably we'll meet on, we can probably meet on Tuesday.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, I'm going to be there all 4 days, mostly because again, there's just 2 people from Minio coming, and we'll have to do the.
Oh, you have only 2? Okay.
But
2 people. Okay.
2 people who are going to be there for the most part. The other senior person who not age-wise, senior director, chief marketing, who's not going to probably be there the entire time.
Okay.
Anyway, so okay, so that out of the way. Yeah, I just figured we might not get a chance to discuss this while we're discussing the topic, and so I just wanted to get it out of the way. Back to the topic. I thought we had designed a way. Tim says one of BR and claim. Why do we need both? Can you remind me who decides whether to allow a random claim to access a given bucket?
Is the question here about the difference between the BR and the BAR, or the BR and the B?
Yeah, one is why do we have a BR claim? He's similar to what you were saying, which is bucket claim should be the equivalent of BR and not the equivalent of BAR.
Yeah, well, the first thing we need to make sure that he understands as a reviewer is the difference between provisioning a bucket and provisioning a credential to a bucket. Because if you're thinking in terms of the volumes, there's never a credential. It's any credentials that are necessary to connect are implicitly generated, whereas with Cozy, they're explicitly generated.
Right.
Yeah,
So that
long ago in this KEP process, we got input from, I believe, SOD of it being cleaner to separate bucket provisioning from credential provisioning. And with that,
it was both SOD and Andrew Large.
Okay, and based on that input, I think at the time, at least, we agreed and separated them. So at the very beginning, a BR did both.
So this is the right model.
What, Sid?
I think this is the right model.
It's just you sound like you're muffled to me, at least.
Okay. Okay, now, so I think this is the right model where we have a separate BAR, a separate way to provision credentials from provisioning the bucket itself, because You can have multiple credentials with entirely different life cycles from the bucket itself. So I think that was the right thing to do. I think the question here is of Tim is wondering why the claim refers to the BAR, or is the replacement, or is the new name for the BAR rather than for the BR. The whole conversation is based on this idea that we want to look and sound more like persistent volumes, and PVCs and persistent volumes stand for creation of the persistent volume, and they don't have this concept of creation of access. So shouldn't buckets, a bucket claim, the equivalent of that in buckets, also stand for creation of bucket, or request for the bucket itself rather than for the access to bucket? I think that's what.
So I think here's where the history makes it more confusing. Because in the beginning, there was no dynamic provisioning, and the claim was a request for access to a pre-existing volume. And then what happened with dynamic provisioning was that you would create a claim that, and you would get, and it would cause a volume to be provisioned. So the name was probably chosen in a time period when dynamic provisioning wasn't being considered and it was meant to be accessed. But then over time, it became the thing that triggers the provisioning, but the name didn't change for historic reasons. And so
Well,
it's
like
just very
voting
confusing.
snapshot, we were asked to change the name because they're saying the PVC, PV name are not right. So when we have a voting snapshot content, we were asked to actually not to follow the naming convention.
Yeah, and we considered this when we chose the names request, as opposed to
It's
just
pretty
like
strange.
bucket or bucket
Now
claim.
we have so many different naming conventions. Now we have three. Not this. For bucket, we call it a bucket request, and then PVC we call it a person voting claim, and for voting snapshot we just call it a voting snapshot. That's the request. So
I see. So what you said, Ben, doesn't it make things simpler rather than more complicated? Because we should go with the original claim, which is.
But we're losing your audio, Sid.
Hello. Is
Hello?
it automatic input volume changing? Let me see. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. So is my audio better now?
marginally. We can hear you.
Okay.
It might be on my end. Just go ahead.
Okay. Doesn't things become simpler when you say that was to refer to a claim to an existing bucket, so, or existing volume. So shouldn't we just go with intention rather than what it ended up being?
What's the proposal, though? I mean, what do you? Can you say that again?
The bucket claim is actually the BAR. That's what I'm saying.
So we would have the BR and the bucket claim. Those would be the two things.
Yeah, the BR and bucket claim. Hey, so someone else issue with my audio. Let me rejoin. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
Is it better?
I guess for now it is.
Okay, that was very weird. All right, thank you, Luis. Luis had to drop off. Okay, so yeah, my proposal was we should have both the BR and the bucket claim. Bucket claim referring is like the new BAR, and bucket request is going to remain as it is today.
Yeah, if the intent is just to rename the BAR to a bucket claim, then I don't have any objection to that. It means we can't use the abbreviation BC anymore for bucket class because it'll be confusing. But-
Yeah.
But
I'll just
that's the only downside I see.
I'll just throw my vote out there so it's recorded, is I think BAR, bucket access request, is more it's more descriptive of what the resource is. A bucket claim, in my view, is more ambiguous because you don't know if it's like a PVC claim and you're going to provision storage, which you aren't. You're only creating credentials. So in my view, this change makes the resource a little less clear what it is. You have to read about it now. That's all.
So coming from the point of view that we should sound as much Williams as possible. The reason being, his words were, why invent something? Why invent something that sounds and looks new rather than something people are already familiar with? So
Well, the answer to that is the answer to that is that if someone looks at bucket claim and draws the obvious conclusion that it's similar to a PVC, they'll be wrong, and they'll be more confused.
Exactly. If you want to get the word claim into one of our resources in the API, then it should be the bucket resource, the bucket request should be changed to a bucket claim. That would be analogous with PVC then.
well, no, right? It's the opposite, right? Because the PVC is really a request for the PV. It's a claim to get the PV. It's not a claim to create the PV. That just ends up being a side effect, I would say, of the PVC today.
I don't think that's how end users will see it, though. I mean, someone with his historical context might understand that, but someone who just starts using Kubernetes at a recent version is going to understand that PVCs are how you request new storage.
Right. Right.
Let us decide what our stances and we can back it. I can see both kind of working out. So I think that one stance is we don't request anything. I don't think it can go well. Other one is we say bucket request is but then the pod spec is going to have a bucket access request instead of a volume claims field. So as far as the user is concerned, it's not clear. Hey, or what if we said what if we called it claim inside the pod rather than the objects can remain as they are, BR and BAR. It's just the way we request buckets is through a bucket claim in the pod spec. What if we said that? Isn't that the only point of interaction between a user and the bucket provisioning system? Like,
Are you saying we somehow get rid of the BAR and make it something implicit in the pod?
I'm saying let BAR and BR stay as they are. It's just the pod has to point to a BAR, right? And what if we call that field a bucket claim field? Like we have volume claims pod spec that is just there to.
I mean, the only objection to that is that it seems like it does nothing but add confusion.
Yeah, that's the opposite of what it tries to do. Okay, so what are we saying? Okay, so
I think we should reject the suggestion to use bucket claim unless it's explained more in a way that makes sense.
okay, let me go over the comments again and see what his reasons were, but I like that the most, to be honest. Let's keep it as they are. Buckets are different from volumes. I guess it's okay to. It's okay. It's okay to keep it this way. It's okay to come up with new names. I mean, Yeah. Okay, let's take the stance that we're going to go ahead and name. I'll fix the cap, and we'll see. We'll go from there. I'll also try to go back and find out why what his reason was behind not wanting it to be bucket access request. And I'll post it in the Cozy Slack channel, and we can have further discussion there. We're almost out of time, or we're actually out of time. So next week we won't be meeting. Happy KubeCon if you're gonna attend either online or in person. And yeah, let's meet in 2 weeks.
Sid, just before winding up, so is it a good time to update my driver? Like, do you feel like the needed changes are the controller and all spot, like, or like should I wait to the cap to be merged or something like that?
I would ask that you wait for the cap to be
Okay.
probably just 1 or 2.
Yeah, sure.
And push this through. Just assume that it's going to take about at least 2 weeks. So if
Okay.
by the next meeting I'll have a more definitive answer for you.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone. That's all. It's good that we came to a spot where Tim is reviewing. He says it's mostly okay. We'll address them and